Xillio was founded exactly 20 years ago. And in these last 2 decades, we developed a content migration platform. We created more than 80 connectors to all kinds of different systems, like OpenText, Documentum, all the ECM and related systems. And we help more than 400 clients all over the world. Today, I will focus a bit more on the preparatory activities. As you can see, this is your typical migration process where you start with the initiation, the technical preparation, and end with the actual migration. We see most clients actually migrate to Microsoft 365, but you also see other combinations where people still move to FileNet, to OpenText, to all kinds of systems. But let's first zoom into the initiation on the next slide. So in the initiation, it's of course like a regular project initiation. But I think for migration, it's really important to have the right migration team, where of course you need a couple of roles and skills. Of course, you need project management. It helps to have a dedicated migration project manager. What you see a lot is that a migration project is part of a bigger kind of transition program or implementation of a new system. But it works really well to also have a project manager for the migration itself. And also to, in that team, to have the business represented, of course. Then you form usually depending on the project size, smallest team is like 5-6 people. And what we also see is have some representatives of the business that actually know the system, know the content. And it's also very important to have the clear objectives and scope. Because what we've seen a lot is that people want to migrate, but have no idea about what content they have, what they actually want to migrate, what is supported in the new system, and how to get everything across. And what you also see is that a lot of people don't do migrations every year or maybe every couple of years. So for clients, it's a project they do once in a while, and they actually need some guidance and support. And not to forget also to set up all the governance and reporting. So if you look at the must-have skills, as mentioned, project management, strategic planning, stakeholder communication, and also a business analyst. Before you can typically really start with a migration, you also need to set up a couple of technical things. Because what we do a lot is that we start with an analysis of the existing system. And to do that, you have to have migration tools in place. And to do that, you have to set up servers, you have to set up software, you have to set up connectors, make sure that the connectors have access, make sure that the consultants can access the server, the software, make sure that the resources and the access is provisioned. And what's also really important, especially with bigger migrations where you migrate tens or maybe hundreds of terabytes, is that you, of course, ensure the network readiness, but also do performance tests. And if you look at all these different things that you need in this phase, then the must-have skills are also a bit more technical. So you need IT infrastructure, you need technical migration expertise, you need systems administration, network engineering, and that especially that performance test is really valuable information for the rest of the project, because then you know the actual throughput of the migration. So you know how fast you can migrate your document to the new system, and that has impact on the planning, of course. If we move to the next one, if you have installed everything, then you can start with the extraction of the data from the source system. And data is kind of everything that you need for migration and to get insights in that system. So think about the actual content, the metadata, permissions, versions, maybe workflows, kind of all the information that you need to fully understand your existing environment. And that really helps to kind of determine what you want to migrate and what you want to migrate first. And what also helps is that not only look at the data, but also look how it's distributed by, for instance, business unit or department or process. Of course, you can present that in a lot of ways. I've seen projects where that's presented in a lot of Excel files, in PowerPoints, but I think what's really valuable if you can also do that in kind of dynamic reports, dashboards, because these dashboards that help you to have a global overview where you can look at this is my total set of content and then zoom in per department, per content type, per folder. The next step is to determine the source to target mapping. So mapping is a bit of a migration term, but what we're actually doing there is we have the old situation and the new situation. They both have a data model, they have content types, and we're actually performing a gap analysis. So we're saying we have this content type in, for instance, OpenText, and we migrate it to this content type in SharePoint Online or Microsoft 365 or any system. And we want to make sure that all the content comes across and that we define rules how to transform it along the way, because these systems usually differ a lot. So you want to make sure that you don't lose any of the information, but also that you don't move it as is, but that you actually use the full functionality of the target system. So that also means that you have to transform it or reorganize it in any way. So we create mappings for content types, for structure, for permissions, for metadata values, and all these things are captured. Sometimes it's a very technical migration where you sit together with kind of the system admins, maybe even, or like the admins of the source system. But sometimes it's much more driven by the business side. And then you can sit together with representatives of a department and have workshops, mapping sessions where you capture all this information and put it all in a mapping. If you have gathered all this information, hopefully you have a lot more insights into what is the current system, how is the content distributed, and then you can start to work on the migration strategy, which is on the next slide. The migration strategy is kind of that you determine how you want to migrate in the coming period. And the period can be a couple of months, but we also see projects where people take 2 years to migrate everything. So that's where you decide if you want to migrate everything at once in one big bang, or you want to do a more phased approach, for instance, per department, per business unit, per content type. And based on all the information you had from the analysis, you can kind of determine the impact of all these different strategies, all these different approaches. So together with the client, with the business, you decide on the right approach, you define the rollout strategy, you can already make a global planning for that. And it's also important, especially if you're working with a lot of different content owners, business unit or business representatives, to prepare the migration validation. That's not only the testing, but also what are the acceptance criteria for the migration, when is it going to be validated? Because especially if you're doing like tens of different migrations with different departments, you want to have a very structured, well-working process. Of course, align it with the stakeholders in business. And you kind of need a little bit different skills. You need change management, risk management, also migration expertise, because it helps to have seen these kind of problems and issues before. And also the strategic business alignment to make sure that all these businesses all their expectations and all their fears are addressed, because what we see a lot is that you can have like 10 different business units, but they are in a very different kind of state. Some of them cannot wait to move to the new system. Some of them are very anxious. So you have to manage that. We move on to design and runbook. Design and runbook is kind of, so you define your migration strategy, you know your approach. Then you create a migration design. In the migration design, you capture all the rules from the analysis and the mapping, but you extend that with a detailed planning, all the dependencies that you have, all the different roles that you need in the migration. And then the runbook is another deliverable where you create for every migration, you create a very detailed step-by-step migration runbook where you say, when we're going to migrate, we're going to do these 20 things. This has to be in place because there are a lot of dependencies when doing an actual migration, and you want to just have a checklist that you use for every migration, and you want to set up a process to evaluate that every time so you can improve and improve so you don't make the same mistakes. And you also want to prepare for, we call it a continuous audit. So you're always in control of your migration so that you know what has been migrated, especially if you're migrated in a phased approach. You want to make sure that you know what you have migrated, what still needs to be migrated, and you need to have something in place that you can report on that at every moment in the migration. And as said, it's important to evaluate, adjust the design and the runbooks to get better and better. If you look at the skills, it helps to have some technical writing skills, because especially the runbook, there shouldn't be any room for error. It should be very clear what's expected and what's needed so that you don't make any mistakes during the migration itself. You need the business analyst, need some process mapping, especially working with all these different businesses and processes. And of course, the migration experience is very helpful there. If we move on to the develop. So if you look at it, we already had like 5 big activities or phases, and only in this phase you actually start kind of developing and configuring the migration itself. So you got insights in the existing system, you did an analysis, you did a mapping from old to new, you set up your migration strategy, you made your migration design, the runbook, and then based on that you can start actually creating the migration. That can be, in our case, it's kind of flows and scripts that help you do the migration. And if you start developing and configuring that, of course you need to test that. So there are a couple of different test processes. One is more the kind of development testing, where you implement everything from design and test it in a small set and expand the set more and more till you're ready for the test with users. And then you move to the test and QA. But before you do that, of course, you have to define the test cases, the criteria. Then you can start conducting the trials and the QA checks. And also there, it's very important to keep track of everything you've done, do some retrospectives and refine based on the results and feedback. So you see, you have some different skills that you need in this phase, more on quality assurance. You need usually, especially with the bigger migrations, a very good test coordinator. You can have some automated testing. Usually you have like a team of testers, and in that team you have usually people from that specific business unit or department. And of course the technical migration expertise and the stakeholder management, really important. And then the next and the last one, then so you prepared everything, you tested everything, you did some test runs on the development, test, QA environment, and then you're ready to actually move and migrate to production. And that can be done in different ways. So you can, for instance, you can migrate one business unit. You can say, I want to migrate this in one big bang during a weekend, and then we move on to the next. But it is also possible that you have a lot of terabytes and it doesn't fit in one weekend. And then you can choose to migrate, for instance, 2 weeks before the deadline, you can migrate everything. And in the last weekend or last night, you can migrate the delta. So the differences since the last migration. It's very important. It's a given, of course, to monitor the migrations, but also you already set it up in the very early phases where you kind of agree with the business, how you want to monitor it, and make sure that you have kind of automated monitoring and reporting on that, and set up dashboards to show the results of the monitoring and also generate the audit reports. And that can be your regular content migration reports, where you have reports showing the old and the new location, consistency reports, restructuring reports, but also reports that show kind of which actions were taken for every document. So if you start with a document in OpenText and you remap some of the metadata, you put it on a different location, all these things can be audited at the end. And what's also very important, if you then migrated it to Microsoft 365, for example, you also want to see what happens post-migration. So that you can also help with the monitoring to check adoption, compliance, for instance, in the period after the migration itself. As you can see in all these phases, of course, you need some level of migration expertise, can be a bit more technical, can be a bit more on the business side, but here you need business support. You need the post-migration monitoring that can be done by migration consultants, but organizations can be trained. And it's very important to have approval management in place, because especially if you're handling a lot of departments, business units, content owners, you want to have a proper sign-offs, have proper testing, make sure that everybody's happy at the end. So my colleague Alvaro has prepared a demo from OpenText to Microsoft 365. What you're going to see is that we're going to migrate from OpenText Content Server. We're going to migrate it into the Xillio platform. We're going to show content in insights, in the dashboards and in visualization. So you actually get insights into your data. And that dashboarding tool really helps to make data-driven decisions during the migration. And then the last step is that we may migrate it into Microsoft